Hello and welcome to Screen Views. I'm Dave.
I'm James.
And this is the weekly podcast where we give our views on a film and TV show.
Each episode is unscripted, unedited, so anything can happen. Listeners should be aware that we do include spoilers, so feel free to fast forward, rewind, or simply buckle up and enjoy a somewhat coherent conversation.
Our podcast is based on the idea that there's no such thing as a bad movie. Therefore, for every review, we'll give a recommendation instead of a rating.
But first up, we're going to have a quick discussion about what we talked about last week to see if our opinions have changed. And we are back. Welcome back to this week's Screen Views.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello. Sorry it's been a while, but we're back. We've done our work, and we're about to review our homework now. And that's what.
Yeah, like it's not good when the podcast starts feeling like homework, James. But...
Well, more like. Do you remember Baker Grove? That wasn't like after school work. That was more like I don't know, like a social club. I don't know.
We got our own little social club going on. That's cool. Social club of two.
Last time it was a pretty big TV show, a massive one, a Goliath. TV show.
Yep.
It was that wraps up. No, I like to work upon it with the.
Yeah, well, the obvious one is something to do with me and a slingshot or something.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do really. Yeah, I just
knocked it out with David's Screen View slingshot.
Yeah. Well,
something along those lines.
Insert your clever quip here.
About David and Goliath.
Yeah. This isn't just about us. This is about our audience. So yeah, you do your own jokes here and you laugh at it and.
Laugh at us trying to make actual jokes.
Yeah,
that never work.
Yeah,
we're pretty good at that.
Yeah,
maybe we should start a bad jokes club.
Don't know. No bad jokes should be aware of the bad jokes club. There must be like a really cool comedy club out there which think they're amazing, but people only go there because it's terrible.
I feel like that's everything. Like that, you could apply that to every sort of aspect of creativity, I guess. But
I either feel like Tommy Wiseau, who did The Room.
Yeah,
I don't think he feels that it's a bad movie. He's a really passionate guy.
Well, there's no such thing as a bad movie.
No.
And it's entertained a lot of people over time. Yeah. There's a lot of entertainment that has come from that movie.
I keep breaking out one rule.
Yeah. Our one rule is that we respect filmmakers.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
We'll see.
But yeah, I think, I mean, it was an interesting part of sort of filmmaking.
Yeah.
In regards to, it is subjective. Yeah. But also the amount of time and effort that it takes to make a film or TV show that we look at, deserves credit.
Even if there was a bad movie, if you think of the worst movie ever, the amount of people are putting their heart and soul into it. It's not like, because it's such a collaborative effort. Like, who's to say that the sound person isn't his like best film, or isn't the set designer's best film, or isn't the... Yeah, it's a shame when films are just so demonized.
It's often comes down to like the directing or the acting or the script or some of the stuff that is like obvious, but like you say, those kind of minor roles maybe get missed. There's an interesting story I think about Barfly, because I don't think it was sort of deemed that commercially successful, but on that set, there was some lighting work that was done that had never been done before.
Ooh. Okay.
And, I can't remember what it was exactly, obviously, with my brilliant research skills and relaying information. But yeah, it's worth looking into, because there are sort of like interesting cases like that where, perhaps not a well-known film, but doing something interesting from a technical point of view. So there's always, always going to be cases like that, I think, which are interesting moments in film history.
I mean, it's a good film. I really like it, but it did get panned quite a lot. I think it's called Real Steel, with Hugh Jackman, and like he trains a robot. It's about boxing, but there's a really cool shot in it. It's a really amazing shot in terms of lighting. And they go from one environment to another environment, and how they do it seamlessly is like really cool.
Yeah.
And I just can't. No one else can't really get that many other people excited about that one shot. So.
Yeah, but like, yeah, again, I think again it's quite subjective because I quite enjoyed that film, even though it's like ridiculously cheesy,
Yeah,
and
well,
very generic. It was, I still enjoyed it. Like sometimes it's what you need as well. Like if I think films and emotions are quite important, and sometimes, people want escape and they don't want something that's going to make them work.
Yeah.
And, so a film like that, for me, for the mood that I was in, it kind of hit all the right buttons.
Yeah.
So, I think that can be a factor as well. We should probably talk about Goliath at some point, shouldn't we? And TV series wise,
I've not gone back to Goliath. However, I've seen quite a lot of like interesting trailers for Amazon Originals lately, and it's sort of like it feels. And Goliath was kind of like say if you look at our review of Goliath, no spoilers here because we're talking back in the film, but our impression of the first series compared to the second series does differ quite a lot, and I don't know what my point was.
Well, the summary was watch season 1.
Yeah.
Don't
by all
bother
means.
with season 2, maybe.
Yeah, but there's like some really sort of like dark dramas, but on the darker side, without any light dramas, that Amazon seem to be pumping out, which is kind of cool. Like I think it's John C. Reilly. There's one with not new one with him, and it's like a doppelganger. The other side of like everybody has a doppelganger. So I'm staying away from Goliath. We just had an intro talking, like saying we're going to talk about Goliath, then we talk about something else.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about Goliath again. I'm just talk about something else.
Well, I think like we said, it's like, sorry to repeat myself, but we were both agreed that season 1 of Goliath is really, really good, really, really interesting, does some great stuff. Season 2 just steers too far away from the lawyering and was perhaps not as good as the first series. But,
and steers
still
far away
worth a
from the
watch.
characters, which is a bit of shit. Because the first one, they slowly dived into the characters. The second one is sort of like, they felt like, well, you know these characters already, so now we're going to put them in a situation and you already know how they're thinking, so...
Yeah, and
and it's sort of like a bad move, just develop the characters more.
Perhaps a lack of development there as well.
Yeah.
Okay, should we move on to Insatiable this week?
I'm gonna try and work it upon.
Yeah.
So last week one was really good. First episode was really good. And this week was Insatiable. That's the easiest. I don't know. I can't work out a clever pun. Late in the day, I'm tired.
Okay. So Insatiable, this is a TV series available on Netflix.
Yes.
And it the premise for the show is about a girl who is fat or overweight.
Yeah.
And she loses that weight very, very quickly. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
And then starts to compete in beauty pageants.
Yeah.
As a result of her newfound sort of conventional beauty, as it were.
Shall we talk about our impressions in going into this, or what we thought it would be?
That might be a good starting point, because I think we're going to have to, to fully deconstruct this series, we're going to have to sort of talk about preconceptions, we're going to have to talk about misconceptions, and we're going to have to talk about our own takeaways from the series, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I think, just for the listeners' sake, this show has caused a lot of controversy around weight issues.
Yeah.
So, a lot of our conversations in this podcast, I guess, are going to center around that, because it's kind of like the big talking point of this series.
Yeah. I heard like there's lots of controversy because from the advert it looked like it was very much about like fat shaming, and this girl was terribly depressed and everything, and then she had a terrible accident, lost all this weight, and then she's like happy and beautiful, and loads of people thought it was going to be a lot of it be like fat shaming. That's going into it. That's what I thought, and I tried to go in blank, but I can't not hear the news articles of people saying, "Oh, this is going to be terrible. This is going to be awful," and it wasn't what I expected. not exactly. It wasn't like a paint by numbers. By all means, there's good points and bad points to it. But in terms of the bad points which I expected going into it, it never really hit all the bad. It wasn't bad in the way I thought it would be bad. Because I thought there'd be lots of visual gags in terms of being big, because the first episode is big about like you have like the flashback, but in terms of that visual gag of actually being big, they don't actually go back to it again in terms of actual visualization of her being big. And there's no like comedy scenes about her shoveling loads of food down and like, well, that's not past the first episode. I think the first episode, if I treat the first episode as a pilot, I don't think they treat the visualization of fatness in a degrading tone, because I think fatness is very much verbal and very much about the dialogue, but they don't have a visual gags of it, and that's one thing I was worried about, because in the 90s it seemed to be okay to have fatness as a visual gag, like in every single TV show or film. It felt like, oh, there's a comical fat person and we're going to take the mick out of them because they're fat. And I feel like it wasn't visually shown in this TV series. But I'm not saying it wasn't there in the dialogue. I'm just saying I expected it going into it. I expected to see lots of visual fat flashbacks, but there weren't that many.
Okay.
Do you agree with that?
I sort of, yeah, I get what you mean. Like, that is the conventional pathway to go, isn't it? And there is that in there, in that they, like you say, they show you those flashbacks sort of in the first episode and throughout the series. Like, it pops up now and again with the odd flashback.
Yeah, I suppose so. But I only really noticed it loads in the first episode, and like I say, that's just visually, that was sort of refreshing. Not for that not to be in there as much, but like I say, the dialogue is a completely different ballpark. So going into it, I expected more visual things, but I was pleasantly surprised about how much, well, the lack of visual fat gags to what I expected.
I guess I see what you're saying, because like, later on in the series, the flashbacks are there, but they may be used to sort of show more about her personality rather than just people bullying her through her fatness. But I think it does come up now and again.
Well, the visual gags of eating and food was only with, after the first episode, I believe it's only with the slimmer version of themselves. Because there's a few scenes. There's a few with the shrimp. The scene with the cake, and I did. That's why I expected loads of visual gags.
Yeah,
and they weren't there.
Well, I mean, like, in terms of my preconceptions, like you, I tried to keep an open mind. Difficult to avoid some of the things that were being said about the show. I suppose I tried to just think, like, this could go either way, and just tried not to, take on board and keep an open mind, like you say.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, the first few episodes, I found this show quite refreshing, and it's kind of like a hyper real show.
Yeah.
It's not like a show that's kind of gritty and true to life. It is quite glossy. It's got a very glossy look to it. Kind of reminds me of something like Jane the Virgin, something like that.
Yeah.
And I think I was looking at the creator, also did Dexter as well.
Okay.
So, or was involved as a producer with director. So, with Dexter. So I think when you look at that show, I guess that kind of makes sense in terms of this hyper kind of reality. So some of the characters are quite overblown, I guess.
Yeah.
Definitely in this show that applies. Less so with kind of Dexter, perhaps.
Yeah.
But yeah, I sort of thought to begin with, this is interesting. Because in terms of a show, it's like sparks a lot of discussions, which I think is quite a good thing.
Yeah.
Whether it is fat shaming or not. I mean, it's got people talking about fat shaming.
Yeah.
Which in itself, I guess, is an interesting thing because, if it was, not as extreme, it might not get people talking about it. I think there's some issues with the show. And I think the sort of the fat suit, the use of a fat suit obviously has its own connotations that I think people have issues with.
Yeah.
And I think there's some things that the main character does that are a little sort of, I guess, reinforce negative kind of stereotypes in some ways.
Did you feel like this is what I felt like, and it'll make sense in a second. Did you feel like they wrote like a four episode arc, and then they got money to do 10 episodes, and I felt like the latter part of the series was just gave up on. So my interpretations of the characters at the start of the series and the end of the series are completely different. And I just felt like it just fell apart completely. And
yes,
so
I would agree with that. Yeah,
so
100%.
One of the highlights of which I thought was quite interesting is having a character with quite campish connotations without actually being gay. I think it's the only time I've sort of seen it. And I really appreciate gay characters on screen which don't have any campish sort of like stereotypes to them. I thought, okay, I really appreciate that you aren't applying that stereotype. And then this time, you sort of had this quite campish stereotypes on the character who isn't gay. Because I know, because we're all different, and I know somebody who was actually quite camp in university, but he wasn't gay. He was he's purely straight. So I thought that's really interesting the way, and you're not buckling this at all, and so I actually gave it props up. So well done for you to keeping at this, and nobody in the show is assuming they're gay either. And I thought, like, well done to you, really, really well done to you. And then the plot twist of like him being curious, I think, oh, what have you done? What have you done? Because what you've done is you basically told the audience, look at these are the ingredients of somebody who is gay on screen. And I don't know, it just that seriously frustrated me completely, because it's something which I didn't agree with at first, but then I thought, like, for them to stick to their guns and not making it about any sexual preferences, and then making this character about sexual preferences, that really wound me up completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I was less bothered by that because it started to do some interesting things around sexuality and bisexuality and starting to discuss labels and had some interesting explorations into polygamy. Is that right?
Yeah.
And which you don't often see on screen. So you don't. No. You often see you might see threesomes for various reasons, and they're normally like to sort of they're normally spontaneous one-off. They like spark like this kind of it's almost like a kind of pornographic rendition of what a threesome is a sort of about. And so this show, when it started to explore those kind of things around love and, can 3 people make a whole rather than 2, and starts to question our perceptions of normal sexuality, or what is conceived as normal sexuality. I thought that was quite interesting, but that sort of feeds into what this show I find like interesting but also problematic at the same time, in relation to kind of character development or a lack of character development. So and what I mean by that is that essentially the guy that we're talking about was
Bob is the character's name.
Yeah, so Bob, at the start of the show, he is seen as quite depressed and suicidal, and then at the end of the series, he's in exactly the same place.
Yeah,
and there's this lack of character development, which on one hand is quite interesting. Like, as people, we don't often develop. We repeat our own kind of flaws, and we have desires that aren't fulfilled. So on the one level that's interesting, but on the other level I found it slightly annoying, especially in so that comes back round to the main character and her like journey, because essentially she doesn't what is interesting, what this show is doing that is interesting, that I think perhaps critics aren't talking about, is in relation to her as a character. Now, I mean, maybe people are talking about it, but I've looked at a couple of articles around, and a lot of it, centers on, why the show is fat shaming, and there's lots of evidence for it, and probably evidence that I sort of agree with in relation to, like certain events within the show. And that feeds into, for want of a better word, there, sort of relates to, the bit at the end with, like her relationship towards food and, trying to get out of using food to get out of a situation. And so some of what's out there I kind of agree with, but what I think is an interesting point that people perhaps aren't highlighting is that, for want of a representation of fat people, or people who are overweight or considered overweight by others, in going back to the sort of like 90s, or like our usual rendition of someone who's fat is that they understand that they are fat or overweight, but they have this great personality that kind of shines through, or if they don't, they sort of go on this journey to understand how beauty is on the inside and not on the outside. And those kind of things have all been done, I feel like. But what this show does is it kind of really does show this person as not a nice person before and after the weight. So it's kind of like there's a commentary there about it's the weight wasn't what was defining her personality, it was her personality. But then on the other hand, you could probably deconstruct it and argue that it's so interconnected with her issues around weight that it is showing that those two are you could perhaps argue that they're not disconnected. But what is interesting is that she doesn't progress as a character, so she doesn't get better. So she loses the weight, and she doesn't. We see that there is a lack of progression, and she actually gets worse. And so I suppose there's perhaps a commentary there that could be quite interesting to look at. Is that as a person, through her weight loss, she actually gets worse. I think, and sorry, I know I'm like ranting a little bit here, but but one of the other things that I can see people having an issue with is that there's quite a lot of repetition about how important physical beauty sort of is throughout the show.
Yeah.
And I think that is quite overt in the show, and I didn't really understand why that kind of needed to be there, because it did feel like it was reinforcing the idea that if you're not like you're not a certain body type, then you're not beautiful.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's kind of like
I'm also quite annoyed that the only representation of a bigger person is also a black person and is also a lesbian person. I felt like there were like 3 tick boxes all in one go. Like I feel like the film sort of like the TV show does have tick boxes of like, okay, we got representation of colour people, got representation of lesbian, got representation of a bigger person as well.
Yeah, I mean,
just feel like it's just too many stereotypes.
But again, that
sticks out like a sore thumb.
That sort of like links into this idea of the white male. It's not white male. Sorry, the white main character using those minority figures to feel good about themselves or understand themselves, or justify their decisions. So on the one hand, you could argue that those characters are quite interesting characters within this show because they are being portrayed on screen in a positive way. But on the other hand, another counter argument to that is that the main character is just using those characters, and like you say, that they are stereotyped in a way. So the kind of idea of
black church going gospel singer who
and I'm big and beautiful and I'm okay with it, and and like so, and confident, and and then, like again, like I say, they're all kind of when you list all of those kind of aspects of someone's personality, they're all really, really positive. But is that just a mechanism for the main character to feed off? Again, sorry, I'm using that word again, which is like unfortunate, I guess.
You've hit on something which I was thinking about when I was watching it. So I was getting to near the end, and I was actually thinking about the show, and I was thinking about, on paper, this is a fantastic show. On paper, you've got a fantastic show. Like, let's just take any character. Let's take Bob's wife, for example. She comes from a different background. She's met Bob. She's fallen in love. And she is pretending to live this lifestyle, and she's panicking so much about losing everything she's got, and she's literally grasping at straws. And that's a really interesting story. It takes Bob's story and Bob's journey between law and pageant thing. Like, do you do what you're good at, or do you do what you dream of? And that's quite an interesting story. And if you've got like so many interesting stories. You've got the Chinese person who is sort of like is uncomfortable around human connection and is trying its hardest to actually make connections with people, and you've got this sort of like fake connection with the Chinese girl, and he's trying to create this friendship with a lesbian. I thought
there's also the best friend character.
And I just feel like every single character in this TV series is interesting except for the fake character.
But I guess that's a like. Yeah, but again, so you sort of grapple with these kind of things because the main character, you sort of think, well, they're interesting because you know, like I say, for the first time ever, we're seeing a main character who, is not being stereotyped in a way, as the, as the obvious, I was fat, now I've lost the weight and I'm happy, or I'm getting what I want. And so we sort of see her sort of grappling with sexuality, with friendship, the results of that, the consequences of changing friendships, and there's so it's kind of like there's a high school aspect to it, there's a road journey to it. But yeah, I think it kind of, maybe it tries to do too much, or maybe it doesn't. Like, it's kind of like interesting, and so I think that sort of comes back round to an earlier point that I kind of made, which is, maybe it doesn't matter if the main character is interesting if you've got these other characters around it that are sparking like debates or are getting people to talk about these kind of issues, or by not presenting things in the best way, maybe that's promoting debate. And maybe that's a good thing, and maybe I think the problem is whether that was intended by the creators or not.
Like on paper, I think it's probably a really good show, but I just think none of it's really executed properly. Like as soon as what's his name, Bob, the other Bob, so Bob's partner, Bob, the other lawyer, which is as soon as his character becomes just changes like in one scene, and it's sort of like I just wish there was like more thought into each of the stories. I mean, even the main character in terms of her relationship with food, just don't think it's done. I mean, I'm going through the process of losing weight, and like hopefully I get to my goal at some point. But my relationship with food hasn't changed. My approach with food has changed. But my relationship, the things that I love, I still love, and I still want huge meals. I still want that. And they don't talk about stretch marks. They don't talk about like dietary things. They don't talk about anything like that. And I felt like she just lost weight. I know she lost weight because like she couldn't eat as much.
Yeah,
but it just feels like a complete accident.
But even that's an issue in itself, isn't it? Because it's kind of almost like promoting quick fix.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a bit of a yo-yo show.
Yeah.
I guess. Because some things that it does and you think, oh, that's really interesting, and then some stuff you just sort of think, oh, no, it's not for me.
But also how the show just steers away. I don't really know what season 2, what sort of show will be. Because it's just turning into sort of like, it feels like it's turning into a Desperate Housewives sort of show now. And
I mean,
just like,
towards the end, it becomes a hot mess, doesn't it? Really.
And if they just ended like 4 episodes in, could they do have like a sort of like a mid-season ending? Because she wins like a little pageant or something there, and I was fine with that. And that's before I felt like say they pitched like 4 episodes. Someone said, "Yeah, that sounds good. Here's some money. Make 10 episodes." And like, oh, okay. Well, we got to add some more characters here. They've got to have this, and we got to do this, and
and then we'll take it in ridiculous directions, like because they kind of, you get the lead in, and then you sort of think it's going to be about like beauty pageants, and then it sort of steers away from that, and then like it just. It just ties itself in knots in a way that I don't think is good. And I think, and maybe that's the crux of the issue, is that maybe it wasn't intended to like push people's boundaries. I don't know. But I just don't see where they're going to take season 2, because when you put a character into like a situation that is going to be like kind of obvious to detect, like I'm trying to like not plot spoil too much here, but I just think they've positioned the main character in a way that there is a distinct lack of progression in terms of her personality, and I think that kind of works for a movie, or can work for a movie, but is to sustain that in a TV show is really, really difficult, because like you say, if you can't get on board with the main character, or you can't like be against them because of who they are, even like like someone like Dexter, you kind of follow him because he's always justified in his want to eradicate like criminals, and so you sort of get on board with his way of doing things, But I don't sort of see this show doing that same thing.
Talking of Dexter, do you think the main character of this show is a psychopath? So the true sense of psychopath is someone that doesn't have any empathy. And the amount of characters around her, which you could have empathy for, she just doesn't have any attachment to anybody's issues, anybody's problems. And she literally doesn't think about anything from anybody's point of view. Is this character a psychopath?
Well, maybe that's what they're trying to get across. Maybe that's what will be drawn out in season 2. Yeah, but yeah, I think it's an interesting show that kind of sparks debate. And I think I'd kind of recommend it for people who want to watch something that they can like think about in terms of like what is this doing in regards to representation. But I think it is a mess after, like you say, strong sort of first half or quarter, and then moves quite quickly into something that is just a bit of a mess. And maybe that's to do with the production times or something. Or maybe it's maybe they do have a vision that we're just not getting at the moment, and we need to see a little bit more. So I think it does enough interesting things for viewers to get engaged with.
Yeah.
But I can totally see why people would not enjoy this show and not understand what it's trying to do, because I'm not sure that it understands itself what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
So I can see viewers getting confused. So I think if you're looking for something that has an interesting commentary about fatness or how overweight or those kind of issues, I don't think the show is really like
not
doing it in a great
but sparks of it.
There's like moments, and then it destroys some of the things that it does positively. And so it's a shame in a way, because I think the show could have had a lot of potential. And we started off this conversation talking about preconceptions, and I certainly didn't think that this show was going to go in the directions that it took. Totally agree. To begin with, that was quite interesting, and we've spoken about some of the reasons why, but towards the end it just got a bit ridiculous. And so it's a shame that the show doesn't grapple with the kind of issues that I was hoping that it would grapple with and present to people as interesting or different. However, in summary, what I would say is that is quite interesting is its ability to present something in a positive light, but then also in a negative light, possibly within the same episode or even the same scene. And so that's why I think it sort of yo-yos a bit.
I think as a as sort of like a backhanded compliment, I think because all the characters are quite become their own stereotypes, and because they don't really develop that much, it's sort of like a perfect background sort of TV series. So if you're doing something and you need something on the TV, you need to binge it, but you don't really want to concentrate that much. Because I can't think of one cliffhanger for each of the series. I can't think of I was watching thinking, I need to watch the next episode, and I can imagine being able to miss 2 or 3 episodes and still be able to jump on board and pick up the pace. So it's not that complicated of a story. I know.
Yeah.
It's just background noise. Yeah, and the one thing that I did like is Audrin. There's like there's two like comical reliefs which were meant to be comical reliefs, and because they were meant to be comical reliefs, I was fine with them. And it was like the white mother and the Chinese daughter, and from the beauty pageants, they are
Yeah.
seriously over the top, and it's a repeated gag. But I don't know. I sort of like if that was the only thing in there, because I understand the show needs a comical relief, and they aren't in it all the time. I'm sort of happy with them characters, even though I didn't like them very much. They're sort of like if they're in the scene, it's going to be a silly scene. It's going to be pathetic. It's not really going to have an integral part of the story. I thought they were sort of like implemented throughout the show quite nicely because they weren't full characters. They're just popping in there every now and again. But I wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't a show which I thought it would be, and the show that it is has a lot of problems. But I made it through, and I will give the second season a go. Not that optimistic about it
Yeah, it's kind of
at
like
all.
you're sort of almost like fascinated to see where they take it.
I want to get the first 4 episodes to go. Like you say, the first 4 episodes of this series was a series that I would be seriously considered. I seriously considered. Oh, I want to watch the rest of this. It wasn't amazing, but it was interesting enough for me to go. Interesting. I want to see where this goes. I'm hoping the start of the next series does that for me as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, like, just to summarize, for me, like on one hand, I really, really enjoyed it, and then on the other hand, like I really disliked it, and so it's just a like difficult one to pinpoint. But yeah, I agree. I'll probably look at the second series. I think there's better shows out there to look at in regards to sexuality. Like, so I Love Dick is probably a good example of something that we've reviewed that I would say is a much, much more interesting kind of show. And then maybe This Is Us is maybe an interesting one to look at in relation to like sort of relationships, but also, there's a couple of overweight characters in there and it explores their relationship to kind of like food and weight and in a way that makes you sort of feel like they're kind of 3-dimensional characters.
Yeah.
Whereas this show, a lot of the characters are very one-dimensional. And sometimes even when you think there's a more interesting 3-dimensional aspect to them, they, like you say, they sort of quite quickly turn into a one-dimensional stereotype that's problematic.
Yeah.
So I think this show is like an interesting one to deconstruct and talk about, or spark, debates about how, a lot of these topics are spoken about on screen, but, from a purely entertainment factor, it's not, it's not hitting the right notes, and that's, I guess, an issue.
No. And it's especially the fact that, like I say, on paper, I think it had so much potential because there's so much interesting stuff in it. This show is full of interesting subjects. The fact that it's just a shame they don't take them on board and they don't really expand any one of them. And no one in the ether, you could expand them more. So the second season, they could think, okay, rather than focusing on these 10 things, let's just have a couple of episodes where we focus on this character and they go through this, or this character and they go through this, or this character and they go through this, rather than just having. It's like they make their own stereotypes, and it's
got some interesting moments. I would say, so maybe worth a watch just for that.
First 4 episodes, concentrate, and then you can background movie. So if you've got like time in the afternoon, let's say you have like a dinner party to get ready in the evening, and it's like 1 o'clock, and you want to start watching something, watch the first 4 episodes, concentrate, and then slowly get everything ready for the dinner party while you got it on in the background. That'd be my recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You like your background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't deserve your full attention.
The latter half of the series, yeah, definitely. I think we agreed on that. Okay, cool. So looking on to the next episode, I would say next week,
Yeah.
but the rate that we've been going, it might.
Yeah.
We'll see when we get that round to it.
I just picked up an object. What object did I pick up?
A sharp one.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to look at next.
The sharp object. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I even acted out picking up an object as well.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's sharp. I don't know anything about this show, so it should be interesting to dive into it.
I've already seen it, so I'll probably need to sort of
do research.
But also not reveal too much.
Okay.
Whilst we're talking about it now.
Yeah.
What I would say is that I think this show is pretty much what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, this is
going
Amy
in.
Adams, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
She's
Do
like
like
the
it.
main character. So the premise is she's a journalist who is sent back to her hometown by her editor to report on a murder that's happened within the town.
Ooh.
So there's kind of like a family connection there, but she's also there for work.
Gotcha.
And we sort of see that play out.
Ooh.
I think it's based on a book.
Okay.
But it's available on Now TV at the moment.
Cool.
So if you're a Now TV subscriber, I think you can get hold of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be an interesting one to talk about.
Although the next podcast will be the monthly roundup, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we can squeeze that in.
Yeah. Boom.
Well, you say month. We've got a few months to cover. So
well,
I think
the roundup.
Just the mini, so the roundup.
Yeah.
I think it's June, July, and August, and September, and maybe a couple of other months that I've forgotten. That
it'll be fine. They forgive us. So yeah.
Yeah.
We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. And recommend people. Give this podcast a like and also give a review if you want. Any hints of what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong.
Yeah, feedback is always good.
Yeah, good or bad. Just give it us. We'll just delete the bad ones and just keep the good ones up there.
yeah. Focus on the positives. Yep.
Yeah. Because no such thing as a bad podcast, hey?
True.
Hey, yeah.
Hopefully.
See?
Some others might distrisagree after hearing our podcast. Nah, we're awesome.
Yeah.
Let's just give ourselves a huge pat on the back.
Boom.
And we'll move on to the next episode.
Yeah, catch you soon. All right. Short
Bye-bye.
outro. Bye.
Yeah.